First of all, congratulations, Ian, for the
Thank
new job as a new master blender of Angus Dundee.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I know
So,
I'm struggling to get my head through doorways these days, but no, I'm yeah, trying not to let it go to my head too much. But thank you. I do appreciate it.
I will pick up on that in a moment, but first I want to start the evening with the bottle for this evening. I hope everybody can see this, the Glencadam 10-year-old. Everybody's got a bottle, I see. That's excellent.
I love it, Helen and Andy.
How long has that been open, Andy? This afternoon? Or?
Sometime.
Oh, okay.
But we came prepared.
Okay, brilliant. So the bottle has been, this expression has been around for quite a while, but I'm getting I get the idea that a lot of new people are getting into Glencadam recently, and it's probably due to this expression.
Yeah, it's been I mean, so I've been with Angus Dundee now for coming on 6 years, and even the growth since me beginning. I mean, I'm not saying it's down to me, but even the growth from the beginning has been really interesting to see. It's a dram I've loved for a long time anyway, and I've loved it for longer than I've worked for them. But it's nice to see it starting to get a bit of traction. I suppose there's always that element of selfishness as well. I mean, I don't want to see it get too good because otherwise, otherwise there won't be so much of it to see. So yeah, it's that balance. But I'm sure that's not the marketing answer. But yeah, it's nice to have it as a little secret.
Yeah. And how do you see it within the core range? Is it, you think, a good representative of what Glencadam has to offer, or?
Very much so. I always think that the 10 is a really good reflection of the spirit style. So, like, we've got lots of different expressions in Glencadam. I think some of you might be familiar with a few of the others, but it is the 10's very much kind of representative of our spirit. Glencadam spirit is kind of it's very tropical and very fruity from new make to aging onwards, and that kind of comes forward in this. It's quite a kind of fresh and fruit style, kind of fruit driven dram, which is quite nice. It's got quite a kind of it's got structure, but it's got a nice kind of zing to it as well, which kind of I think is quite lively and it makes it stand out a little bit, which is nice.
Yeah, I'm just taking the sniff.
Sorry, I got you mid sniff.
Yeah, and that brings me to the wood policy of this, because where a lot of brands these days are really about first fill sherry, big bold expressions. This is more whiskey, and a lot of Glencadam whiskey is like that. Take a step back and let the spirit just do a bit of the talking, and let the wood be taking the backseat on a lot of occasions.
Yeah, it's a funny one. I mean, I think we're fortunate that Glencadam's got it's got a pretty long history. It's been around for almost 200 years, and we kind of know what works. So we fill a lot of bourbon casks. We do a huge amount of first fill bourbon. So we do like that kind of big, buttery, kind of full on vanilla kick that you can get from first fill bourbon casks. But yeah, the spirit sings pretty well. So as long as you haven't got a duff cask, Glencadam can be great in anything from kind of refills to first fills. I suppose for those of you that I haven't met before, I do recognize quite a few of you guys, but for those I haven't met, firstly, I'd like to kind of just announce that don't worry, I'm not going to bombard you with kind of brand advocacy stuff. I love whiskey for being whiskey. I have lots of whiskey brands in my whiskey cabinet next door. I'm fortunate to work for two that I love. I get to play around with them, but I promise it won't be a kind of marketing spiel tonight. I'd rather talk to you about whiskey in an open forum. So when I'm saying the spirit's really good, I mean it because I think it tastes great, not necessarily because I'm reading it off a sheet. Like, the spirit is second to none and the best that you'll find in the world. But no, none of that stuff. So I'll try not to, don't think I'm being too evangelist, I promise.
Okay. So on to the... by the way, if there are questions, please feel free to ask them. And think Ant and Nikki are monitoring the chat on that one. So if there's any questions or comments or remarks, just feel free to squeeze right in. Now you've been involved in a whiskey making job at Angus Dundee for quite a while already. So you started out as a brand ambassador, but then slowly things got next level, and you were involved with the actual whiskey making as well, I believe.
Yeah, so I came from the wine and spirits industry, so retail was my kind of background. I've been a big whiskey fan for a while, but I worked in whiskey retail for 6 years, kind of directly selling kind of high-end whiskey products before joining Angus Dundee. But I suppose I was fortunate to work with some really interesting winemakers in that time as well, and I've got a good palate. I always think palate can be trained, so I don't think of it as like I'm particularly blessed. I've just been fortunate to have people who've shown me what to do with it. But yeah, so that kind of mixed with my kind of enthusiasm for whiskey had me on board in a kind of quality control and blending panel from quite an early stage. So I probably took up a serious role with blending in Angus Dundee about 2.5, 3 years ago. And then obviously, as of the turn of this year, they let me loose with everything, which is not so bad. But it's quite a small team. We work with the family that own the company. So I've worked with our master distiller, Robert, for quite a while, and our other blenders in the company. So I've had very good teachers or mentors, and it's been really great to kind of learn from these guys and be able to now, be let free with it, I suppose.
Now you've mentioned Robert. You're referring to Robert Fleming, the master, the current. Is he still on board because he's soon to retire, I believe, or so?
Well, I don't know if he's soon to retire or not, but yeah, Robert is our master distiller. So he's like a walking, talking whiskey encyclopedia. Honestly, can't say a bad word about Robert. He's fantastic. He's kind of a father figure as well, and he is. Me and him are from quite different paths, which is quite interesting. So I come from kind of I'm not from a whiskey region. I'm not from a whiskey background, whereas he's brought up in the middle of Speyside. He's a 4th generation distiller. His father, grandfather, and great grandfather all worked at Glenlivet Distillery, so he was kind of brought up on a distillery. I think he was working there from the age of 14. So whereas I'm really geeky about whiskey and I really want to learn more, he's done it all through physical experience and kind of building up. But kind of, I think from an early stage, we've always hit it off really well. And he's been really great at teaching me an awful lot that you can't learn from books, but I think things that kind of having people like him to kind of show you what to do has been kind of second to none. And I'd say for yourselves as well, if you ever get a chance to have a tasting with Robert, I know Luna was actually having a chat with Robert not that long ago with myself. But if you do get a chance to have a chat with him, he's the most down to earth person you'll ever meet. But just really knows his stuff. Again, I think it's a nice thing because it's not that we're not loyal to our companies, but we love whiskey for being whiskey. And I think that there's a real respect between different distillers and different things that other people do. And Robert's the same as that. It's not that we think, oh yeah, we make the only good stuff and nobody else does. And he's really humbling and really good at explaining why there's differences and how these things come around as well. So yeah, having someone like that has been amazing to work with. And he's still on the distilling side. I get the easy job of dealing with it once it's been matured. I get involved with the wood policy and things like that, but yeah, he's very much from the barley to the liquid, and I deal with it from the liquid on. So yeah, but it's a cool relationship, and again, I'm very fortunate to work with someone like Robert.
So you grew into your job as master blender sort of gradually, so to speak, but still, I can imagine it's quite something to be involved as part of the team to going to being the final one responsible for what gets to go in the bottle.
It's been really humbling. I think it's one of these things that kind of I've always been a great believer in kind of working to kind of attain what you can do, and I'm aware that I've been given this position at quite an early age. I'm not a typical millennial. I don't really like that kind of definition, and I don't think that I'm entitled to everything in the world. I've worked kind of since the age of 14, scrubbing dishes up to this job. But it's one of these things that I've always been kind of a believer in kind of getting involved in what you can. And I say for me, I was really delighted to be part of the blending team, and I've managed to kind of prove myself to the others in the company that have decided to kind of give me this role. But it's still, I say I'm not quite. I'm still kind of growing to it. I think that it's one of these things that the word master for me carries a big title, and I'm aware that I'm young to that. So I kind of want to kind of honor that rather than just take it for granted and be like, oh yeah, that's what I do now. So I really want to know my shit, I suppose, is that without saying, without too many expletives. So it's something that I'm very keen to kind of make sure I do it properly and not just kind of take it for granted. So it is something that, yeah, I'm keen to kind of prove myself and show you guys what I can do in the not too distant future as well. But,
Menno, Luna's got a question. If you got a chance for her to bring you in.
Go ahead.
Hi Iain, great to see you again. I hope you're recovering from the Speyside Festival very well.
My voice is just coming back, actually. I wasn't used to talking so much for quite a while.
So what is your take on it being a virtual festival? Do you think it's here to stay, or what do you make of it?
I think it was okay. Yeah, it was quite a successful event to run. We were actually just talking about this before we went live, and virtual festivals are cool if they're done right. I think that the kind of virtual booth element is difficult because it's hard to program things to run. But if you have like virtual events, I think it went quite well in terms of you can get packs of tasting things for people to dram along. I don't think it's going to be the future. I think there might still be some virtual festival elements, but although Zoom tastings and things are really great, I think that in terms of actual physical festivals, you lose a little bit of that impact from doing it on a computer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very down to earth when it comes to whiskey. I think whiskey is a lot about experiences, and I think that the best drams are those that you enjoy in good company and something that's a real kind of lovely atmosphere. And I've always tried to do that kind of thing at Tomintoul. So we do like fireside sessions, and it's literally we walk down through a field, through all the cow dung, and plonk ourselves by the river, burning some old staves, smoking cigars, and drinking whiskey. And it's not kind of big and showy, but it's the way I like to drink whiskey, and people love that kind of event. And you can't really do that on camera. So there's an element of both. It has been really good, and I don't get me wrong. I think that the way that things have gone have taught us lots of things. I think I was saying that I've loved to see how the whiskey community has really kind of rallied through this. And we're talking about things like dram swaps, which again wasn't as much of a thing before, and it's been lovely to actually see that. Kind of the whiskey community as a whole, we've been running events, and it's nice to kind of introduce everybody on screen and kind of get to put faces to names, and also bring people from lots of different locations onto one space that geographically you just wouldn't be able to do. So there's good things and bad things, and I think that elements of that will remain when the world starts to recover. I think that I'd love to keep doing a whiskey hangout, maybe not in the same volume as we're doing them, but every month or so, just to kind of keep in touch with people and offer the chance to have a few drams together. So the festivals will kind of come part with that, I suppose.
We've got a question from Chris Amir as well. He can't join us live, but he wants me to ask you a question. Is there any chance of a cask strength release at any point?
If I get my way, yes. Although I definitely get to play about with the liquids themselves, I suppose the strength and things are kind of come down to marketing as well. We do actually do a bunch of single cask Glencadams which are cask strength. So everything we bottle in single cask form is cask strength, and we kind of do that on purpose. For our core range bottlings, all of our bottlings are quite small batch anyway, so it tends to be kind of decided up front. But Glencadam majoritively is it's almost entirely 46 ABV, apart from the single casks. And there's one Origin, which is at 40. That's the only one we do, which is below 46.
Yeah, that's a good question from Chrisimer. I was gonna pick up on that. In any case, wondering in your new role, will you be mostly continuing the path that's already been chosen, or will you be going in a different direction for both of the distilleries?
So I've had responsibility for a kind of foreign cask policy for the last 2 years, and it's been a kind of lesser known part of my job, but it's been something I've been quite involved with. And I don't know how much of it's related to my recent appointment, but a lot of these casks are now kind of coming of age. So expect a lot more finishes from Glencadam and Tomintoul. Not rushed finishes. Like I said, I think the youngest one we've done so far has been 12 months now. Most of them are 2, 3, 4 years. If we were a bigger company, we'd call that double matured, as I kind of last night. I recognise a few faces from last night's tasting. So we do expect some new wood types. It's funny, I think that Angus and Dee generally, they are a very successful blending company. They've been doing it for almost 70 years. Single malts are still a relatively new foray for them. It's only been the last 20 odd years that we've been doing it, which again, I suppose compared to some companies, that's quite a short period. They're very proud of the liquid that goes into the bottles. We're very specific about what we bottle, and our quality checks are really, really kind of thorough. Because we are a small batch releaser by kind of design, we'd like to think you won't get a bad bottle from us. We do check every single cask. I think being a blending company as well, it's always hard to say this without sounding negative because it's really not, but every now and again you'll find a cask that doesn't fit the profile of what you're looking for. If you have to release a certain volume of whiskey every year, these casks can sometimes make it into that bottling because they need to make the volume. Because we don't have that demand at the moment, but because we don't have that demand, we can reject casks quite comfortably because we can find another use for them. Just because that flavor profile doesn't work within that particular SKU doesn't mean that it's not good. And there might be a blend that I've got that I keep a selection of lots of different casks that maybe don't fit the profile we're after, because sometimes one of those will be really good in a blend that we're making. So we are really thorough on that, and I think that that's something that's come with with the cask finishes. So the reason that there's not been a lot of cask types before is because they want to make sure it's very consistent and they know what works, so they kind of stuck to what worked. And now we're starting to experiment a bit more. I'd like to think that if it was bad, we still probably won't release it, and we'll find a use for it elsewhere. But we are now. The last few years, I've kind of convinced the owners to take a few risks, try a few new types of wood as well. So there's about 9 or 10 different types of cask finishing coming through soon. There'll be 2 or 3 new Glencadams before the end of the year. Fingers crossed. I've signed off 2 of them already, so it's just getting kind of packaging and artwork approved. So there'll be some new cask types coming through. I don't know. Did anyone get their hands on the cognac reserve that we did?
Fortunately not. No.
So I've just discovered that we actually have. Well, this is recorded. We have a few more cases than we thought because they accidentally duty stamped an extra 20 odd cases. So we thought we'd sold out completely, but actually the market it was going to can't take it because it's got a UK duty stamp. So in the UK, there is a little bit more of it available. 20 cases isn't a lot, but there's a tiny bit more than we thought. But literally, this is quite interesting for us because Glencadam has grown in kind of popularity kind of gradually over the years. But literally, this release sold out in a week and a half. 4,800 bottles like that. And again, we don't do allocations. We don't do this kind of stuff. But it's been an interesting sign that people are starting to understand what Glencadam's about. It's a lovely finish. I was going to say, I don't know if you guys have a distribution network between yourselves. I'll let you figure that one out. I might be able to pour you some. I have a personal bottle that I wouldn't mind giving you some of. I won't give you all of it, but if you did want to taste it, if I send Menno a reasonable size sample, maybe he can send you some. I don't want to cause...
It's in a short answer, yes.
Brilliant. I was gonna,
but I say if I can get you some to try, it's a lovely dram. If you can find one, it's stunning. The profile of cognac with Glencadam works really well because of our spirit's very fruity and zesty to begin with anyway. So big, heavy, sweet casks work. They're nice, but they don't necessarily they're not necessarily the best show of our spirit. But something like cognac works really well because you get that spiciness that comes in from the French oak. There's a lovely kind of chestnutty walnut note that comes out of it, as well as loads of kind of cloves and cinnamon. So it makes Glencadam a bit heavier, but not heavier in like a sweet sense. Just it's got a bit more oomph.
yeah.
It's 46. It drinks above that, I would say. It's got quite a lot of spiciness to it, but it was a really fun experiment. So much so that I've just taken on a big order of more cognac casks because we're going to do it again. But yeah, sorry, I digress a little bit.
Okay, but so on the one hand, you have the tradition of Angus Dundee as being a blending company, and on the other hand, you have the increasing popularity of Glencadam. Now, yep. Glencadam is, relatively speaking, a small distillery. Is there any risk of the two sort of getting in conflict with each other, where the increasing popularity of the single malt puts...
Possibly. It's a funny one. I think that we would try to avoid that if possible. Again, even in the kind of 5 to 6 years that I've been with Angus Dundee, the proportion of Glencadam that's reciprocated or is used in blending has gone down slightly because we're using more of it for single malts. It's one of these things. I think that blends get a bad rep. There's really great blended whiskies out there as well. I know that single malts give you a great identity of a place, but Glencadam as a blending ingredient is a really great tool to have. Even 1 or 2% of Glencadam added into a blend makes a really great difference to complexity and balance. So because it's very fruit forward and got that really kind of crisp kind of freshness to it, it adds top notes that are hard to find in other malts. So it's really useful for blending. However, it's maybe wasted as a base. So we don't really use it as a base malt for many blends because that spirit is better in small portions than necessarily going for kind of something that's going to bulk it out. So yeah, we are kind of stepping it away a little bit. It does have a high value in the reciprocating side of things as well. So people want casks of Glencadam. So it is quite a useful bargaining tool for our other ingredients that we use, but it's something that we are trying to kind of change a little bit.
So you'll be looking more towards Tomintoul as the sort of the base, because it's a bigger distillery as well. It's 3 or 4 times the size of Glencadam, I believe.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, so three times as large. So Tomintoul has a bit more volume to play with. Funnily enough, Tomintoul is actually a better base for a malt as well, because it's got more of that kind of creamy, nutty character to it. It's good as a kind of staple malt, so you can use a larger percentage of Tomintoul in a blend than necessarily Glencadam without kind of throwing it out of kilter. So yeah, so we will use more of that, and I think that part of it is finding the right cask types to be able to use in a mix as well. So we are changing a little bit of our filling policy so we can allocate that accordingly. But yeah, stock management is a funny one. It's something that I'm still getting my head around. Obviously, I get to taste some pretty amazing casks, and I can kind of look through our system and be like, right, let's look at these. And they go, well, you can't use all them because we need to keep some of it for X, Y, or Z. So yeah, I think that's something that is still taking a while. I think that obviously planning and making sure you don't use up your next year's allocation in one bottling is always a difficult part of being a distiller as well. But fortunately, our demand is good enough that it sustains it without being so good that we're running out every year. So that's something we try to maintain.
Now, for you personally, you're combining two jobs for Angus Dundee. How does that go about? Because you obviously in pre-COVID times you would be traveling a lot as well. Now you're having to spend more time at the distilleries. You're doing these online kind of tastings. How do you go about these things?
Wearing lots of hats. It's a funny. I think that you can shoot yourself in the foot a little bit because kind of the company like what I do on the brand ambassador side, and when they gave me the promotion, they kind of said, "Look, we want you to keep up some of the brand ambassador side of things because it would be a shame to lose you out of that side of that kind of doing tastings in this sort of scenario." So they wanted to kind of make it clear that I was still going to do both, which is working at the moment. We'll wait to see what happens when things travel a bit more. But if any of you are eagle-eyed, you'll actually know that we are currently hiring for another brand ambassador. So we are looking to kind of split that resource. And I think the idea is before we've had brand ambassadors who looked after the UK and I primarily looked after overseas, or UK and Europe, and I was doing kind of the US and Asia and things like that. I think that the new role we're hiring will be someone who covers a bit of everything. So it is to give me more time to focus on the blending side. I wouldn't want to give up the travel altogether. I love it. And it's something that obviously dependent on projects and releases. I can kind of plan accordingly. There are a couple of people that I kind of work with that I could rely upon to do some of my job if I was overseas. But yeah, it's something I suppose we've not kind of come to that hurdle yet. But at the moment, I'm juggling a few different caps. So I'm doing a couple of events a week with Angus Dundee distillers in terms of Tomintoul and Glencadam tastings, and then I'm also obviously working on projects as we speak as well for new releases and looking at cask analysis and stuff as well. My house.
Iain, if you're asking if anyone wants that job, the short answer is yes.
He couldn't fix anything else.
If you are interested, so we're hiring through LinkedIn. I think the ad just went live this week. So yeah, if anyone is interested in traveling the world and drinking whiskey for a living, I can vouch for it. It's not too bad. All we ask, I think that they're looking for, and I say I think because I've been more involved in blending projects in this particular role for the hiring, although I will be on the kind of panel, is that they're looking for someone with a bit of experience in the BA side of things. I think before we've hired people that we've kind of trained up, but because of the kind of the current situation and with myself and my commitments, I think the idea is we're looking for somebody who can kind of hit the ground running. That's the only specification. However, if it's a job that you think, hell yeah, that sounds like what I want to do, don't put that put you off applying for it. There's no harm. When I applied for this job for myself, I didn't have any brand ambassadorial experience, and they took a punt on me, and it worked out okay. So never say never, but if it's something you fancy, I say I'm not here to do recruiting, I promise. But yeah, it is something that we are hiring, and that will obviously affect the time that I travel. So I'll probably not get to go to quite as many destinations as I used to, which is sad in a way, but they let me drink whiskey for a living instead, and so that's not so bad.
Not wanting to go too deep into that, obviously, but what are the wages, the hours, and what's a pension? Is it like a health scheme that goes with it, or?
It's not bad. All of it's not bad. It's yeah, as I say, it's a pretty cushy job if you enjoy traveling and you enjoy whiskey. It's not an easy job to run, and there are times when it's very busy. And I say being a BA sounds amazing on paper, but there's definitely times where you're fed up of airports at 5 a.m. Especially if you've got a stinking hangover from the night before. But no, it's there's definitely kind of our job is to make brand ambassadors' jobs is to make the brand ambassador job look really good. And don't get me wrong, there's lots of pros, but there's hard parts that come with it too. But usually you forget about it after a few drams, so it's not so bad. But yeah, so there is plans for us to kind of to allocate for that, and I think that long term it'll probably end up with me doing more and more on the blending side and probably doing a bit less of the travel.
So, we've got a question from Lee, which kind of goes hand in hand with that, to be honest. He can't talk because he's got the kids in the background, but he just wants to know what a day looks like for you, what you do in like an average day.
So I have nothing as Groundhog Day, apart from through COVID, but My day, it can be anything, which is kind of fun. I enjoy the fact that it's very sporadic. So sometimes I'm doing cask analysis from 9 in the morning till 5 at night. Sometimes I'm writing tasting notes for single casks and new releases. So I just saw a good comment coming there from Phil. But yeah, so sometimes it's doing tasting notes, sometimes it's doing analysis, sometimes it's looking at new wood types. So doing orders with customers, visiting bodegas and wineries to secure orders. Other times it's getting flights to who knows where, doing work with distributors in different countries, or just follow up and kind of general relations. A lot of my time I do is spend with chatting to people like yourselves about kind of whiskey, who social media, or say organizing tasting events and this kind of thing as well. So it's a very, very varied job. I think that the more that I've been doing the master blender role, a lot of it is looking at casks. So a lot of what I'm doing at the moment is looking at new releases, either labs at Coatbridge or Tomintoul, or I say get stuff. Sometimes it gets delivered to the house if they trust me with it. So there's literally lots and lots and lots of little bottles of whiskey is what my life exists on at the moment. But it's all good fun. And yeah, testing my nose every day, I think that's an important thing. I remember seeing a great tasting with Rachel Barry, and she was talking about the best thing you could do is smell whiskey all the time. Because although I'm pretty confident in what I do, the more you smell over and over again, the better you get trained in how things run, and you become almost autonomous. It's like driving a car. When you start learning to drive, it's the hardest thing in the world, but once you get it, it's fine. It's kind of the same thing. I think a lot of it is still just getting my steps and knowing where different stocks are, different parcels, what I should expect from certain types of casks, etc. And although I have a grounding on that, every day is a school day. So it's a very, very mixed kind of day, I suppose.
And how do you divide your time between the two distilleries? Because they're not a million miles apart, but they're not exactly next door neighbors either. So
yeah, well, it's funny. So most samples at the moment, anyway, with everything going on, tend to get sent down to Coatbridge, which is our bottling plant. So unless it's something really substantial, so if it's a random sample of say 60 casks, I'll go up to the distilleries, because it doesn't really make sense to send all them down to Coatbridge. But for other releases, I'm looking at them down there. So all of our kind of main tech and equipment lives in Coatbridge. And there's various machines that I don't have in my house because they cost 40 or 50 grand a pop. So I can do so much from my living room, but the rest of it I have to kind of take to the lab. Also, cat hairs and things aren't very popular with customers, so make sure that there's sterile environments when need to be. But that's a joke. I have a very sterile working environment here too. But no, I guess it's a bit of everything. So my time's kind of split. It's at the moment it's probably, I'd say, like maybe 30% Tomintoul, 30% Glencadam, and 40% other blends or single casks. I think again, when I was saying about the fact that I'm a big whiskey fan through and through, one of the really interesting things with Angus Dundee is that we also have an amazing selection of single casks. So because they spent kind of 50 years prior to buying Tomintoul, buying, trading, and selling casks, we've got some really enviable backs of the kind of inventory of stock from pretty much every distillery in Scotland. I think we've got every distillery apart from 4 in our warehouses somewhere, of the existing distilleries. I mean, the closed ones obviously not so much, but there's a few of them too. So yeah, sometimes I'm looking at casks of those for single cask customers, projects, etc. So it's a bit of everything, which is cool again, because I think if it was just tasting the same style product over and over, obviously that's part of the job, but it's nice to try other things as well and amongst that mix.
And is that also the reason why you're still so fond of being the global brand ambassador? Because on those travels, you obviously get to meet a lot of people from other distilleries as well. So that would not only be a friendship thing, but also will sustain or maintain your network.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that generally, I think I've not gotten to the stage, and I hope I never do get to the stage that I kind of look down at whiskey enthusiasts. I think that that's where I come from. I love what you guys are doing. I think when we talked about doing this tasting, I love doing these kind of things because it's exactly what I was doing before I worked in the industry, and I still do. I still like to take part in other people's tastings because every day's a school day, and it's cool to learn, but also cool to kind of hang out with like-minded people. I'm sure I could learn things from you guys as well from having a chat, and I think that it's great to have that, and that love and that enthusiasm for the industry in general is what makes the whiskey industry so special. I don't want to lose touch with that, and I think that it's really gratifying to go out to markets, especially if it's a product that I've made and they don't necessarily know about it, to hear people being like, "That's really good whiskey." And I'm like, "Oh, thanks." But it's also great to just chat whiskey, see what else is out there, see what other people are doing, and yeah, catch up with my friends from different companies as well when we travel. So I don't want to cut that out entirely. I can see inevitably that it will probably, my travel commitments will slow down slightly over time, which is fine because I have aged about 20 years in the 5 years I've been doing this. Lots of travel does definitely take its toll, especially on the bags under the eyes. But it's something I wouldn't want to give up entirely. And again, I really like chatting to you guys, chatting to kind of whiskey fans. It's part of the fun, and I think that I know I'm very fortunate in my job to get to do something that a lot of you guys would probably love to do. And if I can help you get to that, I would love to. And that's not in a belittling sense. Like, I'd love to kind of the industry is awesome. If you can find a way into it, if you're ever curious of how to get into it, drop me an email after this. I'll happily share my contacts. But it's something I love to kind of share that passion and again, kind of, tell you how great whiskey is, because it is good, whether it's ours or someone else's. It's a great little industry, a great little community as well. And I'm happy to very much kind of sustain that if I can.
Do we have a question from Luna, I think?
We do, yeah. Luna, do you want to ask a question?
Actually, 2 questions. I just posted a second one. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ian, do you have a favorite cask type for the spirits of Tomintoul and Glencadam?
Good question. Yes, I do. Old Glencadam and a BB2, incredible, really hard to beat. BB1s, so first of all, bourbon casks are great in up to say 15 to 18 years. First of all, bourbon casks, great fun. If you can find Glencadam Spirit kind of 20 years plus in second fill bourbon, it's the bomb. It's so hard to beat. It's just, it's a perfect kind of harmony for me. So Glencadam BB2s really lets that spirit sing with age. From younger types, there's a new type that we're using that I absolutely love, but I can't tell you what it is yet. That works good at all ages. I tried stock in these types of casks from 8 years up to, I think, 30 was the oldest. We tried a few different casks. And this cask type works amazingly for both Tomintoul and Glencadam, particularly Glencadam, but I can't tell you what it is yet. I'm afraid it's not out yet. There will be a release in this cask type before the end of the year. I actually had a phone call about it this afternoon, so I can tell you that much, but I'm afraid I can't say what it is yet. Tomintoul is another one. Tomintoul, when it's aged, so Tomintoul with a bit of bourbon cask in it, is amazing in PX. It's not great in PX from the get-go because you kind of lose the fact it's Tomintoul. Can become a little bit gloopy. But Tomintoul would say 10 years on it, maybe a little more. Again, I can't be too specific. But Tomintoul with some time in bourbon and then finished in PX is fantastic. Robert Fleming's 30th. Again, I'm not just saying the old expensive ones, but I know that Luna, did you get a chance to try that one?
Sadly not, because I was a bit late and I live in Germany, so it was a bit of a hassle to get the drams actually.
Well, so I took in a tranche of really cool casks, and I don't know how much you guys know about sherry. I'm guessing you probably know a fair bit about the fact that a lot of sherry casks aren't proper traditional sherry casks. A lot of it is effectively sacrificial sherry. One of the perks of coming from the wine industry, I suppose, is I've got a little black book of contacts, and I recently took in a tranche of 20 and 30-year-old PX butts, so proper seasoned PX from one of my favorite producers in Jerez. And we've used them in a variety of finishes across our range, and they've all been amazing. So you don't get much tannin from a cask that age, but you do get a really great integration of flavour. And that Robert Fleming bottling was literally, I think it was put into these casks for 16 months. So it's a 28-year-old spirit put into this cask for 16 months, and it was just awesome. So again, PX with a bit of bourbon first works really well at Tomintoul. There's also another one which will be out, I think, at the end of this month, but again, I can't tell you what it is, but it's also awesome with Tomintoul. Menno's actually talked about this type of cask before, because I remember discussing it with you, not saying that we were using this particular type, but you said it would be really good for Tomintoul. But again, I'm sorry, I can't tell you any more on that basis. But generally, I mean, both of our distilleries really suit bourbon barrels. I've always been a big advocate for bourbon cask whiskies, because I think the word bourbon barrel sometimes turns people off. People go, oh, right, okay, I kind of want a sherry, or either people want heavily peated or they want heavily sherried, and everything in between is just kind of seen as wishy-washy. But good bourbon casks, so not things that have been used so much that they don't taste of anything, but good bourbon casks are a really great way to see a heart of a distillery. Whether that distillery, you taste it and you go, okay, I've tasted the heart, but it doesn't suit bourbon casks, that's another question. If it's a big meaty spirit in bourbon barrels, it doesn't really do it for me. But it does let you give you a good idea of distillery style. So Tomintoul and Glencadam are both quite light spirits. Both of them really suit good quality bourbon barrels. First fill from, I say, 10 to kind of 18 years. second fill, anything older than that, or just a reasonable quality kind of refill. Effectively, that's a sexy word for an older cask, but so there's a bit of everything. So yeah, I know that's a very vague answer to your question, but I kind of have soft spots for a few. Ask me again in 2022, and I can tell you exactly which ones I love. But there's a few I can't yet.
We've got a couple. Well, we've got a question from Chris Amir, which will lead on to a question that I've got. So, he's put, how many whiskies do you taste with regards to quality checks?
So that's a really good question. It depends on what we're doing. So there's kind of different screening phases. So for quality checking, the first thing we do is nose everything. So you can nose kind of 60 to 80 whiskies in a day to a degree. You reduce them down to 25 ABV. Robert does it at 20. I do it at 25. I've always found it gives you a little bit more. And you wouldn't really drink whiskey at that watered down. I don't drink whiskey at that ABV, but for nosing, it's really good for faults. So if there's something wrong with a cask, you'll smell it better if it's lower alcohol. So that's preliminary screening. So you go through and you nose everything at a reduced strength. Then when you've kind of picked your cask, so you identify parcels. When it comes to actually doing a run, we'll taste every cask before it's dumped. So sometimes that's done in the lab. Sometimes that's done literally above the troughs. So before we turn it over and pour it out, we'll draw a sample from it, check everything's good, do a quick dilution, give it a quick taste. And effectively, our guys that we've got a lot of long-standing employees at Angstrom-D. They know what to look for. So we'll do a prototype blend of whichever whiskey we're going to make. So that'll be done in the lab. Check every cask, put them together, make sure they all go together. And then the final stage of screening is before they dump it. They check it again just to make sure nothing's gone wrong, because obviously when you stir casks up, when you're taking a Valinch sample, you really need to stir up the wood. Lots of people don't do it because it's you don't really think of it, but things like tannins sit at different levels in casks. And once you've rolled it across a yard to dump it, that's when it's really properly shaken up. So it's always good to do a final check just to make sure, because if you get something that's ultra woody because all the tannins have been sitting there, you don't necessarily want to throw that in a blend because you'll notice it. And when I say blend, I mean a single malt or whatever it is, just the makeup. So there's kind of 3 stages. So it's nosing for faults and selection, then tasting when you've got your cask you think you want to use, prototype blend, and then final tasting before it gets vatted.
Awesome. And this leads me on to my question, which is, you mentioned that the first fill bourbon, you can lose the taste of Tomintoul on that using that cask?
No, it's for sherry.
Sherry.
So if you use like a really full flavored barrel type, so things like a tawny port, things like a Oloroso sherry or a PX sherry, if you take our new make spirit and you stick it straight into one of those, it'll taste good. But you won't necessarily get that uniqueness of a Tomintoul Glencadam spirit. And I would say that to a lot of distilleries as well. Again, I won't kind of name and point because I'm sure other people would say differently, but I think that Speyside is a great example of that because there's lots of distilleries in Speyside that make quite similar styles of whiskey. Obviously all different, but there's a lot of similarities between us and a couple of our neighbours. And I reckon if you fired Tomintoul spirit into an Oloroso sherry butt for 20 years and you fired some Glenlivet spirit into an Oloroso sherry butt for 20 years and you fired some Glenfarclas into an Oloroso sherry butt for 20 years and you tasted them all at the same time, the difference would not be as big as you think. Because those casks are all quite big types and they're all quite light spirits. Glenfarclas maybe being a wrong example for that. If you have a lighter style spirit and you stick it into a heavier style cask, the whiskey will taste more like the cask than the spirit. If you did bourbon cask Tomintoul, bourbon cask Glenlivet, and bourbon cask Glenfarclas at 20 years, you'd taste the difference better than you would if you did that type of wood.
So my question being, have you had an instance yet, or do you think there ever will be one, where you taste it and you think this is a cracking whiskey, it just doesn't taste like Tomintoul, so you can't use it? Or
I mean, you can still use it. So we had some amazing Oloroso sherry butts that were filled from the 1970s, and they're brilliant spirits. And again, I think I'm maybe being too blunt with it. I mean, you can still taste it to a degree. It's just much harder to detect. So the distillery character of a whiskey always kind of dissipates a little with time. So the longer it's aged, the more the wood will take over the flavor. If it's a big full flavored type of cask, that'll impact it more than a lighter flavored type of cask. So yeah, there's some that I've tried that if you gave it, like, it's a great spirit, I'm tasting it from Tomintoul Warehouse, I know what it is. But if you gave it to me blind, I might struggle to tell you it was a Tomintoul. And that happens with lots of distilleries as well. So I'm a big fan of bigger styles of spirit in sherry butts. So things like Mortlick in a sherry cask, you can't beat. I think it's awesome. But Mortlick in a bourbon cask isn't that brilliant. It doesn't really do it for me so much. Again, I know there's lots of different opinions on that, and I'm not saying I'm wrong, but I think that bigger, meatier styles of spirit really suit sherry maturation. However, if you're tasting that style of spirit in a bourbon cask, you'll get more of an idea of what that distillery tastes like. But if you taste it in sherry, that's kind of what they're designed to do. Meatier styles of spirit are built for heavier flavor types, whereas lighter, more elegant types of spirit are built for kind of more bourbon barrels, allow them to develop without kind of overpowering them too much, which is the reason that they're kind of seen as quite kind of preferential. You can sidestep this, of course, by doing like a refill. So if you did a refill sherry, or a kind of third fill, something like that, where the sherry impact isn't as strong, then that's different because you'll get a bit of the influence, but you'll get more of the spirit. So that's how you kind of counteract that. But if you stick it in a first fill Oloroso, you'll find out that you kind of, a lot of that flavor kind of gets a little bit kind of more subtle, or gets a bit more kind of compressed because of these big flavors that are in the wood.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
No problem at all. Like I said, don't get the impression that that fully matured stock and sherry is bad. There's definitely it's definitely got a place for it. I know that. So, for example, the Glencadam Reserve Andalusia, some of the whiskies in that are fully sherry matured. Some of them aren't, and we actually kind of balance them together. So some of it is bourbon cask finished in Oloroso, some of it's fully matured Oloroso, and we kind of softened it up. And Tomental cigar malt as well. That's a recent one we've done that has fully matured Oloroso stock in it as well. But I think if you were to try that whiskey, okay, there's a peated element to it as well, but it's quite a big sidestep from your kind of standard Tomental style that you'd maybe expect. Which is all part of the fun, really. And I think that there's always that battle as a blender, I suppose, so you want your distillery to be, if people are buying a bottle of Tomental or a bottle of Glencadam, you kind of want them to be familiar with what they're buying. They're like, okay, cool, I know what to expect from a Tomental or Glencadam. This is the kind of flavor profile I'm going to get. Okay, it's got age, excited to see what it does. If I give you something that doesn't really taste like it, but it's a nice whiskey in its own right, it might kind of throw people off. But because you can make whiskies of all sorts of different styles. I remember playing around with kind of, I just realized I probably shouldn't tell this story too much, but I effectively tried to recreate a meatier style of spirit using our spirits for a bit of fun, just to see. So obviously we don't have that production style, but I kind of picked casks that were pretty weighty and tried to make like a heavier style of our spirit just to see. And it came out really nicely, but it doesn't really taste anything like Tomental or Glencadam. But like using different cask types to make like a heavy style for a bit of a laugh, just kind of playing around in the lab to see what we could do. So yeah, you can make whiskey of any style you want to a degree, but obviously things like peat and kind of sulfur and things you have to do through distillation. You can't really add that through cask maturation.
Awesome. People have started that have been tasting the 10 as we've been chatting.
Yeah.
It's going down a storm, to be honest. Everyone seems to be loving it. There's a question coming from Helen and Andy. Do you want to ask the question, Helen and Andy?
There you go.
Just wanted to ask really what elements would make up your perfect dram. Ooh. And why? Just as an addition, and which whiskey would you sit down with at the end of the night just to chill out with?
That's a tough one. Perfect dram is a hard question to run because it's very much based on the day, I suppose. I can answer the second part of the question first because it's an easy one to say. If I was picking a dram of anything we do as a nightcap, I would choose Glencadam 21 every time. There's lots of great whiskies we do, but as a nightcap dram, you kind of want something that's got a bit of warmth to it. You want something that's going to kind of leave you warm and cozy. And Glencadam 21 is literally like a hug in a glass. I love the stuff. It's like a cozy, warm hug. You get nice kind of sweet spices. It's got a mellow kind of note to it. It reminds me of when you're kids and you used to kind of drink hot chocolate and maybe have like a bit of toast or something before bed. That kind of element to it, but in an adult form. So yeah, I love lots of things we do, but that would be my nightcap dram if I had to pick one of our brands. If I was making a perfect dram, it really depends on what I was after. I really love incorporating a bit of peat into our whiskies, and if I was to say anything, it's something I'm going to try and do a bit more, especially for Tomental, because the cigar malt was a kind of experiment with that. So we do peated whiskey at Tomental, unpeated, and we do like a medium peated one called Peaty Tang. But actually for cigar malt, I brought in some of the peated stuff with the unpeated stuff just to see what we could do, and I really like what of it. I don't know if any of you guys have tried it yet. If you loved it, tell me. If you didn't, it was probably somebody else. But no, it's a whiskey that using that little bit of that, it was really good fun. So I think I would probably try and incorporate a little bit of peat in there, not to have a kind of knock your socks off style smokiness, but just to give it a little bit more texture. So yeah, it's a hard one. It'll probably be mainly BB2 focused. Bit of BB1 in there for creaminess and thickness. It'll probably be 46 ABV or higher, because I like that mouthfeel. Probably would reject the refill side of things because I quite like them to be big and in your face, although refill is definitely useful. But yeah, it wouldn't be one cask type. I'd probably kind of maybe use a little bit of 1s, 2s and peat. I say I love a sherry cask, but I can kind of get a bit bored of sherry sometimes. It's something that when I was younger, I absolutely loved sherry cask whiskies. It's all I would drink. I went through a real phase of drinking loads of big sherry cask styles. I've got lots of really good sherry casks next door, but I probably only have 1 or 2 of them of a night. Bourbon cask for me, I don't know if it's a geekery thing. I really like good quality bourbon wood in distilleries. Really does it for me these days. I like to be able to taste what I'm trying, and if I'm having a dram from a different distillery, especially, it's quite nice to be like, oh, this is different to my whiskies and why. So yeah, I don't know. That's maybe a geekery element to it. But.
Is it also because a bourbon cask would be more honest about what you're drinking? I mean, in a sherry cask, you can sort of disguise or hide a few faults away behind the big fruity flavors.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's a good element of that, actually. I think that, as I say, I've always enjoyed, and the more I've gotten into this role as well, because again, although I've been working on the production side of whiskey, I suppose, or the producer side of whiskey for coming on 6 years, I'm still relatively new to it, some people, and I think that I love to see how things impact what they do. So in terms of our process, I want to know why our fermentation times and why our distillation makes that spirit taste the way it does. And if I'm trying other distilleries, I will kind of want to know what they've done and why it ends up tasting the way they've got it too. So yeah, it's harder to hide behind bourbon, or just kind of used white oak to a degree. But I think especially bourbon casks are what we use a lot in the industry. But it's harder to hide behind that. BB1s can give you a big oomph, but you can still kind of drill down into it. And I think that as long as the wood isn't totally knackered, doesn't give any flavor at all, it does really give you a good sign of a whiskey. Or a good idea of what that distillery does. And I say, even if that idea is you go, yeah, it's all right, I'd rather try it in a sherry cask, at least you know what it's going to taste like. But yeah.
I've got a question coming from Frank. Frank, do you want to unmute and come in and ask?
Do you dare?
Hey, Frank.
Yeah. Go for it, mate.
Well, as my nickname might suggest, I'm kind of a peat fan, so I know the old Alan Trullen.
Yeah.
Is there a peat cask expression of Glencadam, maybe on its way? And if not, why not?
There might be. So funnily, we've never used peated spirit in Glencadam in terms of peated malt. The reason for that is our production isn't massive. So Glencadam is almost spoken for from when it's distilled. So because of either our own uses, reciprocal trading, or for our kind of projections, we've just never really done peated spirit there. However, we might be playing around with some peated casks just to see what happens. Although, interestingly, we actually talked about this a little bit last night. I'm sorry for Che and Mick, because I know you guys were on the tasting last night. But and Lee as well. So I just spotted you too. It's great. I'm honestly coming to listen to me again in a row. By the way, genuinely, that's a kind of humbling experience. You're like, oh Christ, is this guy again? But no, it's so yeah, we played around.
They're saying that in the chat, to be honest, Iain. They're not.
But no, I was going to say that I was telling these guys a story that I remember trying a single cask Glencadam that was peated from the 80s. I can't remember, it was early 90s. I think it was either 81 or 82 or 80 on the dot. I was from Cadenheads, and I was in a very famous whiskey bar in the States called Jack Rose, based in Washington. The most ridiculous whiskey range I've ever seen. But the guy there was a real geek, and he's like, Iain, have you tried this before? And I was like, no, I've never tried this bottling. And he's like, this is when the distillery was peated. And I was like, all right. And he poured me this dram, and I tasted it, and I was like, I mean, yeah, it's peated, but I'm pretty sure we've never done peated spirit in the last kind of 5 decades. So I went back, looked through our archives, and yeah, sure enough, we didn't do any peat. So I think it's a bottle that they filled into like an Isla cask, but it was definitely peated Glencadam. It just wasn't made by us. So it was an interesting one to try. But yeah, so it's not really something we do. in the past, I mean, we use lightly peated distilling malt as spec, so there's a slight peatiness to it, but not much at all. And yeah, I'd love to experiment and see what happens. But again, I think that the production element at the moment, we're working 24/7 at Glencadam. We only slow down to do cleanouts. So I don't know if we'd physically have the time to run peat through the system. It's quite an intensive process in terms of what it does to the system. So at Tomintoul, we do a heavily peated run for 5 weeks of the year. But when we do that, we do it at the end of each kind of close down. So we do 2 weeks in the summer, 3 weeks in the winter. Or maybe got that the wrong way around. Yeah, two summer, 3 winter. But anyway, when we do that, we give it actually like a full caustic flush 10 times. So it's 10 full caustic cleanouts to remove that peat taint. We don't have the luxury. I know Springbank go from like Hazelburn to Springbank to Longrow to Springbank to Hazelburn. So they phase the peat out through the production, which is very clever. But for us, we don't have that. We haven't got anything in the middle really. So we literally go peated or heavily peated or unpeated. So the clean out itself is quite intensive, and we don't really have time at that for Glencadam at the moment. We also are kind of reluctant to expand. So it's one of these things that the distillery itself is really interesting, because although physical production has expanded, they literally mimicked what was there before. So they've never put in more stills, but they have made the same shape of still, but slightly bigger. And it's the same with the washbacks and same with the mash tun. They literally upscaled it a little bit, but in the same form as before. So we don't really, if we had an extra set of stills, then we could do these kind of things. But again, I suppose that then takes away from us doing what we do. But I will try my best to bring out more peated expressions for you, Frank. I am experimenting with Old Ballantrae and PX, partially nicked off the fact that I love the Lagavulin Distillers Edition. So I was like, smoking PX works pretty well. So yeah, there might be some Old Ballantrae sitting down with some sweet finishes in there that I'm trying out. So do watch this space. And I suppose the other thing is, when I have groups like you guys, I always welcome any suggestions as well, because the worst they can do is say no. I'm always happy to play around with stuff. It's not my spirit at the end of the day. Yeah, they pay me to play with it, but like if I make a mess of it, it's not my problem. I'm joking, but but no, if you have any cool ideas that you think of, like, do you know what, you should try this, then I'll never say no. I'll always give it a shot if I can. So
not cask related or peat related, but I've got a question coming in, wondering if in any time in the future the core range of Tomintoul will also be upgraded to 46% ABV, because a lot of stuff is at 40 now, I believe.
Yeah, so Tomintoul's always been at 40 for a lot of the core range. A lot of that, I suppose, is due when it was founded as a brand. That was very much the norm. A lot of it's still that way for export. So Tomintoul is a brand that sells quite well overseas. It's a funny one. I know we've had this chat before about chill filtration as well. I think that chill filtration is an interesting one. I think the more you get into whiskey, the more that you can see the difference of a whiskey that's not been chill filtered. Scientifically, it doesn't change flavor. That's been researched by Spurry, but it does change mouthfeel. And I agree with that. I think that you can still pick up flavors in whiskies that have been chill filtered, non-chill filtered. I've looked at it in the lab, and they are still there, but because of that, you lose a bit of that thickness and that spice that then drives the impression of flavor. So although technically you can kind of experiment with it, it does lose that kind of, I suppose, a little bit of depth. That doesn't mean that they're all bad. Tomintoul 16 is literally the whiskey I drink the most. I think it's a really great whiskey. I don't think that one particularly needs to be non-chill filtered. With a whiskey of that age, if you were to then keep in those fatty acids, brilliant, it would be more spicy. Tomintoul's kind of known for that kind of sweetness, that creaminess, so it gives you that element. But yeah, I think that if it was up to me, I'd do everything at cask strength. I think you know me well enough to know that answer as well, because I love to kind of show a whiskey as true as it can be. I think what I can say is that more things in Tomintoul will start heading towards non-chill filtration. Don't know if everything will, but more of it will. There's one core range expression that I've just done the new bottling of, and I know that's going up in strength. So due to personal request, but there's a few things that will follow suit. I think that Tomintoul's always kind of played it safe. We have really good markets for it. People like that gentle dram element to it. And obviously you've got to think of your customer base to a degree. Glencadam, I think, definitely appeals more to kind of whiskey geeks. And I mean that in an endearing sense. I count myself as one of those, but if you don't classify yourself as a geek, that's totally okay. If you do, I mean it in an embracing sense. But I think that Glencadam ticks more of those boxes because it is that non-chill filtered natural color element to it. And I think I would love to show what Tom and Tal can do, because Tom and Tal Spirit is brilliant. It's really, every distillery says they have an experimental distillery, so I'm not trying to go that cliche route, but it is really flexible. You can do a lot with Tom and Tal Spirit. Ballantrae being quite an extreme example of that. But it makes really good spirit. It's just a shame that people don't get to see it in all of its kind of glory. If you've tried any of our things like the 14 or the Portwood that we do, you can see Tom and Tal in a different light, and they do have a bit of everything, but I think you'll see more higher proof expressions from Tom and Tal coming out. Maybe not the whole lot, but I'll see what I can do. But no, it's as I said, there's definitely a place. I think that 40%ers do get a bit of a doing sometimes, and it's not necessarily always justified, but there's a bit of everything there. So do watch the space. I think more things will creep up, I think. And I think that the markets are changing as well. So like places like the US, which were traditionally like the Scotch is kind of soft and mellow, the US is creeping up now. So although it's still a big part of sales, with the bourbon boom has led people to understand the difference between strengths and chill filtration. So that is slowly changing, whereas other markets that was always a slower market than the European one in terms of kind of whiskey geekery, I suppose. So there are changes coming, and I think that that's influencing what will come out through us as well.
Now, you've talked about one of the things you would like to be doing, or will be doing, and have been doing in your new role is experimenting with casks and playing around with different finishing types. I know a lot of it is down to skill and experience, but how much of a risk factor is calculated in when you're trying to explore new dimensions and new ways to create whiskies?
It's a great question. Funnily enough, I suppose the advantage of me being a big whiskey geek before I started with these guys is that I've tried lots of these cask types. So I kind of knew what I wanted. I knew what to avoid as well. There's a couple of types of cask that I wouldn't use because I've never tried a good version of it. I suppose that's foresight of looking at other people's products. But then there's other types of cask that I've been kind of pitching to get. For example, if any of you know any good Calvados producers, please give me a shout, because I can't find any at the moment. It's obviously only just been legalized recently, but I've been harping on about us doing Glencadam and Calvados for a long time. I've finally got approval to do it. I just can't get any casks. But if you know anybody, I'll pay you in whiskey. So yeah, there is a kind of funny element to it. So they're willing to experiment, and I think that, like I said, that I have a cabinet that is the cabinet of curiosities, all the oddballs, the stuff that doesn't quite fit the profile, which from my perspective is cool. I love casks that are like, oh, that doesn't taste anything like I thought it would. So we can use them though. So if there's customers that are wanting a particular flavor profile in a blend, it happens a lot that you kind of go by a recipe that you've decided, okay, I'm going to use 15% malt, I'm going to use 2% peated malt, kind of 3% Glencadam in that mix, I'm going to use this type of grain, I'm going to use this type of cask. And you taste it and you're like, yeah, it's kind of there, but it's missing something. And sometimes these cask types can be useful to kind of bulk it out or use to kind of fulfill the flavor profile you're looking for. So if there's types of wood that we've used that maybe didn't do what we wanted it to, we can always use it in other purposes as well. We're quite good at, I was going to say upcycling that way. So there are things, there's always a use for something. And I think that if there was a cask type that we think really didn't show off our spirit, we wouldn't bring it out. If it was really not good. There was one type of wood that we used that 3 of them, funnily enough, we filled about 40 of these types of casks, and 3 of them were bizarre. They just didn't really do what we wanted them to do. It went a bit marmitey. It wasn't quite sulfury, just a bit odd. But funnily enough, the way that we dealt with that was we actually recycled the whiskey. So we took it out, we chill filtered it on purpose because it takes out some of that element, and then we put it back into different casks to rejuvenate it. And actually, one thing I was going to say is that chill filtration is quite good at cleaning things up, even if it's so you can get some pretty stinky casks. Not that Tom and Tal falls into that category, but if there's anything that's not quite right, you can actually treat it this way to kind of to buffer things out. So there's distillers tricks that you kind of learn along the line, but there's ways of kind of refining things, and we can always reuse things in different ways if they don't quite fit the profile. So we're experimenting to see. As I say, all of them are coming out well enough that I would be happy releasing them. Big selection of red wine casks coming out in this direction as well. I've been trying a few different types. And yeah, some really cool wood types. Cognac being a real superstar that I've recently tried, but yeah, we need to get some more of that. So I've literally just ordered loads of cognac casks that are coming through for some pretty prestigious houses as well, which is cool. So definitely there's some kind of cool stuff coming through. And yeah, we yet to find one that's horrendous. And if it is, then we won't use it.
Is there any logic behind what kind of cask types you are allowed and are not allowed to use. I mean, there's a lot of distilleries experimenting with mezcal cask. You've mentioned Calvados casks, but it's pretty much. It seems to me like 50 years ago, someone wrote down a list: cognac, yes; red wine, yes; mezcal, no.
Yeah. So that's a really good point. I've always been a big challenger of that. I had a pretty heated discussion with somebody from the SWA once when I was talking about Calvados, which is a few years back, and I was saying that effectively, I was like, why are we not using Calvados casks? And their argument was, well, because there's no historical proof of using Calvados. And I said, but yeah, there's no historical proof of using Australian wine because it's only been a thing for the last 50 years. And they told me I was being facetious because the wine casks are okay. I'm like, yeah, but Australian wine's a new thing. Like that wasn't in the industry in the past. Nor was Californian wine, but we're okay to use them now. Whereas Calvados is a centuries old industry, whereas Australian wine definitely isn't. So I was, so I've had those debates already because I'm like, well, how long's a piece of string? It's kind of like when it's convenient. So yeah, there's types of casks that we kind of want to use. I'm not that bothered about using mezcal at the moment. I'd like to try out a couple of tequila barrels just to see if I can get like a Reserva Añejo cask. I could see why that would work. I wouldn't necessarily want a kind of basic Reserva. I think it would be, or a basic Añejo. I don't think it would be seasoned enough. So yeah, it kind of depends. We're using things like rum, but really what we want is something that will benefit our spirit. So cognac, I thought would be fun because that French oak impact is going to be quite different, and it will work really well with like the fruitiness of Glencadam. There's some which are kind of fruitier wood styles or sweeter wood styles that I think will work well with a spirit style, especially after a bit of time in bourbon. And then there's things like red wine, which I think is currently kind of producing quite nice results. So red wine, as long as it's not too tannic, can work really well. We've never gone down the STR route. I think that STR and things like that, casks that have been rejuvenated or kind of scoured, it's great if you've got young spirit, but we're kind of fortunate that we've got a lot of aged spirit. Our distilleries, Tom and Tell's been around since the 1960s. Glencadam's been around since the 1820s. We don't really need to release 3-year-old stuff. Therefore, the use of things like an STR cask isn't really of interest to us at the moment. I'd maybe like to try one out just to see what it does, but we're not that bothered. We're quite happy giving it a long season because I think that it's a bit more organic to the process. But I understand why people use it. I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to do, but we haven't really done anything like that or scouring or anything like that. We don't really go for that method yet. We'll never know. Maybe it's a great thing.
How difficult or easy is it to not tap into whatever's trendy at this moment? Because you do see trends of using different types of cask for finishing your whiskey. Like wine finishes are really popular at the moment, where they weren't 5 or 10 years ago.
It's a weird one. I would generally say that we're not that trendy a company, and I probably include myself in that category. And I kind of like it that way. We don't really try to be doing what everybody else is doing. And even with our finishes, like a lot of what we're doing is new for Angus & Dee, but we're not reinventing the wheel. We're not doing finishes that people have never heard of before. So it's not that we're doing it to try and be cool and different. We're doing it because we're interested in trying it ourselves. There's one cask type that we're using that I'm not sure has been done before, but I need to double check it. But other than that, these are all casks that have been trialed and done by other people. So it's not like we're not doing anything revolutionary. We're just doing it different for our spirits. And we've never really kind of jumped on that bandwagon either. So although red wine finishes are becoming part of what we're doing, it's mainly because we quite like it, not necessarily to be like, oh, cool, look at our red wine finish. So yeah, we're fortunate in that way.
I wasn't implying that, by the way. It was just as an example.
No, I know what you mean though, because it's a funny one. Like they're not too bothered about kind of being cool and trendy. They kind of just Angus & Dee are quite cool at being a kind of liquid company. We're not necessarily the most prestigious brand in the world. We're not necessarily the kind of best known. You're not going to find kind of a Maserati with Tom and Tell branding across the side of it, but we do some pretty good whiskey. And they're comfortable in that realm. Angus & Dee are a very successful company. I mean, we supply about 4% of the world's export, which is not a small feat for a family-owned company. But they're not particularly pretentious about it. And I must admit, even when I joined, I was kind of almost underwhelmed because I was expecting them to be like a bit more kind of like, oh yeah, we're really good at what we do. But like, yeah, we do it because we like it and we know what we're good at and we know our strengths, we know our weaknesses. So they're kind of modest in that way, which I quite respect. I think it's a nice thing to be. I suppose it's nice to be underestimated as well to a degree. And I think Glencadam's a great testament to that. And so many people I meet at tastings and things that come over and like, oh, what are you all about? I've never heard of you. And leave going like, oh, wow, that's really good. it's kind of nice to be on that side of things rather than the other way around.
I see a lot of very good suggestions coming in the chat. I think I've seen Ouzo casks and things like that coming in. That might be a bit far fetched, perhaps, but I
don't think anything of that kind of so anything with the kind of aniseed element to it, I don't think is legal yet. I actually tried I think it was from Lakes Distillery. I tried orange wine, but not traditional orange wine. It was actually literally wine that had oranges in it. Which we can't use in Scotland because it's had orange fruit. It was actually quite a nice finish. It was really refreshing and different. But the SWA won't let us do that. There's no chance we'd get oranges into our whiskey. So they are still restricted. So I think Ouzo, Rakia, that kind of stuff will still be a while off. But yeah, because I'd love to do Iraq. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Iraq. It's like a Lebanese spirit that they make in clay pots, but it's kind of like an Ouzo Zambuca kind of thing, but a bit more finessed. It would be fun to do, especially with like a peated whiskey, but I can't ever see that getting legalized in the distant future. Limoncello, again, same thing. So anything that's got kind of fruit that isn't grapes or apples is very hard to do. Molasses, grapes, apples are kind of pretty much all they allow, and even apples are borderline. They don't like cider, but Calvados is okay apparently. So again, I don't want to be. I know this is recorded. Hi SWA. I'm not trying to give you guys a bad rep, but yeah, there are restrictions definitely there, and to a degree I understand why. But yeah, some new types of wood or some of those more exotic cask types are still a long way off. Absinthe, Tabasco, all these kind of things. They're all all still off limits at the moment.
Sometimes it's a good thing, I think, especially there are really weird cask finishes. I've seen like the Tabasco. I think Dickel did one of those, and I think there was a German whiskey who did it in a herring in a kipper. They called it the fishkey, or what was it like? It was
fishkey, yeah. It was actually really horrible.
Yeah, it doesn't sound good. I mean, there's history of that happening in Scotland back in the Prohibition days, but I mean, we didn't really advertise it. It was more of a kind of, that was the West Coast distilleries just packing it into whatever they had. But yeah, a herring barrel. Ooh. I mean, if it was salted enough, don't know. But yeah, it is a funny one. Sorry, I've not really had a chance to keep an eye on the chat. I've seen there's 99 comments plus, so I need to have a little looky. But I'll maybe get a chance to read through before we go. I've seen someone just killed off the bottle of Old Ballantrae. Amazing. I'll have a chance to catch up with them just because there's so many. But again, it's a nice size of group, guys. If you do want to ask any questions, just unmute yourselves. I mean, I don't want to overstep Menno and things, but do kind of, there's no problems. That's it.
I'm just here.
Just ask a quick question about the cognac finish you mentioned, Iain. Would that be the one that you were talking about? I don't know if you can see that.
Yes, that is indeed the cask.
It is marvellous.
So for us, it sold out kind of in record speed. We don't allocate things, and it literally disappeared in a week and a half. Customers were selling it on one bottle only allocations. Mm-hmm. The only good thing I would say is we're not so popular that people have started to put it on auctions and make double the money, which is good. So you can still pick it up and kind of show them that's not the way to do things. But that's a different argument. But no, generally it's something that we've we found a few more cases, which is not even. It's almost kind of clumsy, but we didn't realize we duty stamped them. They weren't meant to go to us. The importer that we're meant to be taking them are not best pleased, but there'll be a few more going into the UK market. So those once they're gone, that's it. But it's interesting for us because again, we've done small batch releases for a long time. That's most of what we do is small runs. But that's the first time we've seen it disappear that quickly. Which it's an interesting sign because people are obviously interested in Glencadam. But again, we don't want to be in a situation where everything we release is gone before you can let people taste it. And like I said, my offer to let you guys try it. I don't know if I can get you a full bottle, but I'll happily share some of mine if you're interested. I can figure out who to send that to if you're able to share the love. But yeah, it's one of these things. I think it's always nice to taste these whiskies, and I think, like I was saying before about Dramshare and about the kind of whiskey community now, I think it's one of the nice things that's come out of COVID is that you might not want to drink an entire bottle of whiskey to yourself. I mean, you might. It's a good night in, but generally drink responsibly. But no, I think it's quite nice to kind of share these things with people. And if you meet people that say, "Oh, I've got a bottle of this," and you're like, "Well, I managed to get a bottle of this," and they go, "Cool, do you want to do a 1-for-1?" Like, I think that's really nice. I think it's a really organic way of sharing what's great whiskey. It's also a good way of making friends and networking as well. And yeah, I know that I've had a few things coming through the post, which I've definitely not said no to. and people that I've kind of, something I always ask when I'm doing a tasting is what's new, what have I not tried yet? Because again, I don't get to see so much of what else is going on because I'm obviously quite focused on our own stuff at the moment. So I've had a chance to try some lovely drams that people have sent me, and vice versa. So it's been good to see.
Ian, where do you think we would find one of those 14-year-olds, and what sort of price range are we looking at?
I think they're about 70 or 80 quid. Don't quote me on it. It's funny, I don't really have a relation to the UK pricing anymore. I suppose because I've not been doing my normal BA job as much as I was before. I don't really know what prices things are, so sorry for my ignorance.
I just looked up where. If it's 70 on Master of Malt, if you're looking for it, it's still there.
Oh, nice. Yeah, so that sounds about right. The reason I know that is because these barrels were bloody expensive, so I know they weren't going to go crazy cheap. So I knew it was in that kind of mark. As for the cast we got are really, really good. We managed to kind of strike up a deal with some pretty prestigious cognac houses. I can't tell you which one, but it's one of the top 4. And yeah, it was pretty exciting to get these barrels, and the condition of them was superb. So much so that literally, I say, when that sold out as quick as we did, we kind of went about trying to get another order. So there's some cool casts coming through, and again, you'll see another finish of that type in time. It did take a while. It's quite a long finish on that one. So there'll be a little hiatus until we can get these woods kind of filled with liquid. But it's quite exciting for that as well. And again, it's refreshing for me to see, because these are things I've worked on from before that are now kind of coming of age. And I say, fortunately, whether that was part of the family's plan or not, these casts that I've seen from landing in our kind of in our yards, I've kind of seen from start to finish, which is really quite cool. So I'm getting to see the end product of something I've been kind of talking about, which is quite exciting. So, out of interest, have any of you guys seen our rum?
Not yet, no.
Do you know we did a rum?
I'd only found out yesterday after Ben sent us an email about it. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's been another foray. So although I'm now technically a master blender for whiskey, I'm also a master blender for rum, apparently. But no, we were playing about with this. This was a project that came about through discussion with one of our importers in the Caribbean. And they put us in contact with a really good distillery that I can't disclose which one, but it's from the Dominican Republic, and there's 3 distilleries in the Dominican Republic. That's all I can tell you, and it's probably from the one you know. So we got these really interesting...
So you've just told us without telling us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could you tell us the 2 it isn't?
It's the unnamed Orkney of rum.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so we got these really cool casks of rum, or this really great shipment, and we effectively made our own finishing from it. So we decided to try and experiment with a bit of whiskey influence. So we took in these casks. They were 5 years old at the time, and we created a 5-year-old rum. But actually, what we did was we aged it for a lot longer than that. So actually, they're at least 6. Also, that's maybe not as public knowledge. The other thing is that we're not like the actual rum industry. So every kind of age that's on the bottle is actually aged, not just an average. Because the amount of rum is the most loosely legislated industry in the world, but in terms of spirits anyway. But so we brought in these really cool casks, and we did 4 different types of finishes. So we call it Ron Larimar, which is named after a semi-precious stone that you find in the Dominican. There you go. I was going to say, if I was actually good at my job, I would have one here, and I actually do. There you go. But looks like this. You might recognize the bottle. But Ron Larimar has been a fun little experiment. So 4 different types of finish. One is in first fill Oloroso sherry butts. Tastes like that diplomatical sort of style, something a bit sweeter and richer. It's lovely. We did one for 16 months in PX butts. We did one in first fill bourbon casks, and we did one in peated casks, which is the weirdest but kind of brilliant thing I've ever done. It tastes like mezcal, but it's rum. It's odd. It makes an amazing margarita. So we did this little trio of 4 rums for a bit of fun, really. But I was kind of overseeing these while I was doing lots of other things. And actually, they've come out really nicely. So it's like Dominican rum matured in Scotland. So there's a random tangent for you. But if you fancy trying them, they're about 30 quid each. But really interesting stuff. I'll come on and do a rum tasting sometime if you like. But yeah, so that's kind of been a side project. I don't distill this stuff. I've just played about with the liquid, but it's kind of along with our cask finishes, that's been another little foray for us for a bit of an interest project more than anything else. But the results are pretty cool. So
yeah, I'd love to do that in the future if you're up for it.
Yeah, I'll be up for that. We could do a wee rum.
Yeah. Awesome.
Ian, that elusive cognac cask is available in Germany.
Yeah.
For 85 euros.
Ah, well, I was going to say, from our market, the German market took a huge amount of it. So we actually, without going too much into the politics of it, we've got a new distributor in Germany for Glencadam, and they love it.
That was the question I was going to ask you.
Yes,
thank you.
So I would say that Glencadam's status in Germany has launched quite considerably since we switched distributors. The other guys were great too. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to insult them, but our new distributor absolutely loves it, and they took a huge portion of our stock. And again, so although it sold out for us, I didn't mean it's necessarily sold out in shops, but it sold out on our end. We had none to sell. But as to the German market, took quite a large portion of it, which is a good sign. And for 85 euros, that's not too bad a conversion rate. I'm trying to think in between.
May I ask who your distributor is?
Kammerkirsch.
Oh yeah, they're very active. Yeah.
Yeah, so I know those guys anyway. So they're doing a bit. So Tom and Tel goes through Bremen Spiritosen, and as I'm not going to name the other guys before because that's a bit unfair. But as Kammerkirsch put in a pretty good bid for Glencadam, and they've done a really good job with it so far. So yeah, interesting stuff. And again, I think that hopefully you guys will see some more Glencadams going through Germany, because it was always, when I did shows like Bremen were very, very good at doing representation for us, but I'd usually end up on their stand and I'd be banging my head against the wall because the people are like, oh, do you have more whiskies which are higher proof? I'm like, yeah, we do an entire distillery that does it. And they're like, where is it? I'm like, I don't know. I've not seen them here. So it's quite nice to have those guys doing a bit more with it too. But yeah.
Helen wants to know what the name of the rum was again.
And so it's Ron Larimar. I say it's named after the stone that you get in Dominican House. You can't even see that because of the glare. There you go.
Larimar. Okay.
Larimar. Yeah. I say it's been a fun side project, but it's rum made with a bit of whiskey pizzazz. Is the best way I can describe it. It's kind of a half and half. It's like a really sweet Speyside in terms of flavor profile. But yeah, so it's molasses rum, but with a good bit of finishing in our warehouses here in Scotland. So yeah, it's been a bit of fun. Again, I think it's an interesting thing with Angus Dundee is that they're never afraid to try new things if they think it's justified. And it was a few customers were asking, so we thought, yeah, we'll try that for a bit of fun. It's turned out pretty well. We charge a price for it that we think is fair. We don't want to kind of rip people off. We want people to drink it. And I say for a rum that's got the pedigree of casks we've put into it, plus the amount of time that's actually involved. Again, like I said, kind of never necessarily believe the age you see in a rum bottle, but this is rum bottled at SWA standards, so it's actually the age of the bottles. I say most of it's actually, well, in fact, all of it's 6+, but at the moment it's 5 because that was the brand we tried to make. But yeah, it's a bit of fun. So don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say it should detract from our Glencadams or Tom and Tels, but it's a nice kind of thing on the side. And if they let me go to the Caribbean more often, I'm not going to complain about that. So we'll wait.
I put in the chat about the rum tasting, and it's gone down well, so we can try to arrange it if we can.
Yeah, I'm very happy to do so. Like I said at the start, I love doing these events. I love having a chat with you guys. I hope you can tell that from this. I'm not in a rush to go anywhere. I hope I'm not boring anybody is the first thing I was going to say. But
no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Mickey's asking if there will be a rum tasting set available of the 4 as well.
I'm sure we can figure something out. Yeah. So that in terms of where markets are and things to get it, then I can maybe get some bottles to whoever wants to distribute them. But we can discuss it. But I'd be quite happy to show you the rums we play around with. I haven't got quite as much chat on the rum. I've never been to the distillery because they've not let me go out there yet. But I can tell you about everything when it gets to this side, and I can talk about the flavors in there. But they're quite good fun.
We'll have to let the rum do the talking.
Yeah, exactly. That's to be for quite.
Can I ask a question that I forgot to ask earlier? Is it possible, I know it's not possible at Tom in Tal, but is it possible at Glencadam to organise a tour maybe for a wee little club like us?
Yes, when the world is back together, definitely.
Yes, sure. Please, not before.
Great question, because I was going to ask about the distillery centre. You were ready to open or nearly ready to open when COVID struck. So how's that coming along now?
We're in exactly the same place as we were back in March last year. No, we've done a few things, but the distillery is still quite. The groundwork for the actual centre hasn't even started yet. Everything's been a bit slowed down. So what we've done is if in Glencadam, in fact, where your photo is taken, you can see there's like a little house in front of the main part. So that's at the front of our distilling element, and then there's another little house behind that. So where Menno, where you're sitting, so that's currently our kind of reception area and office. We've moved that into warehouse 4, and that area is going to be converted into the actual visitor centre. It's not going to be a big commercial thing. It's not really what we do. It's more of a kind of homage to the area. Glencadam's got a really cool history. It's almost 200 years old. It's survived 2 world wars. It's burnt down twice. It's a distillery that keeps on going, even though it's never expanded to be the size of Glenlivet, Macallan, similar people of the same age, but it still makes really good whiskey. And I think
you're not a proper distillery if you haven't at least been set on fire once throughout history, I think.
Like the idea of it's funny, someone asked us before if we'd bring back direct fired stills. I'm like, no. Yeah, putting alcohol in flames is something you discover quite quickly if you're ever trying to flambe a steak or doing some crêpes Suzette. It's not really a great combination, especially on a large scale. But yeah, so for us, that's one of the things that has changed over time, is we took the fire from outside the stills and put it inside. But no, it's kind of homage to that. It's also homage to the kind of area. So like Dundee and Perth, which are kind of neighbouring cities to Brecon, were massive parts of the blending world. Nowadays, it's not so much known. They're not as glamorous as, say, your kind of whiskey regions or necessarily even the big cities in Scotland, which still have their heritage to it. But back in the day, I mean, Dundee and Perth were substantial, and they were that's where all these grocer blenders were exporting whiskey across the world. So we kind of want to nod to that as well. It's an area with a lot of history that's kind of been left behind a little bit. And when Speyside became the supergiant that it is, the East Highlands kind of got a little bit left in the dark, because all the transportation and kind of whiskey went up that way, really. So a lot of people around Glencadam and kind of distilleries that are neighbours to us once upon a time don't exist anymore. So it's a nice kind of nod to it, but yes, it'll be a small visitor centre. It won't be a big all singing, all dancing Macallan thing. So yes, and it'll still be quite small groups. But Luna, to answer your question, you just need to ask the right people at Tom and Tell as well. I'll make sure you guys can get a tour at Tom and Tell. If I'm trying to think inside, when the world comes back to normal, we'll try and organise a date. I'll try and show you around in person if I can, because I know where all the good casks are. But no, I'd love to kind of show you guys around if we can, or at least make sure someone looks after you. As a general rule to yourselves as well, if you are interested and you want to come see us, do drop me an email. I'll share it with Menno and Ant and Mickey and let them kind of reach out to myself if you're coming up to the area, or you just want to come and say hi. I'm always on an email somewhere for whiskey questions and photos. The other thing is, if you're on social media, you'll find me at Scotch Voyager on Instagram. I'm not the most tech savvy. I'm more about making whiskey, but I do try to post the occasional interesting story, usually with a bad pun. But if you ask, do keep in touch. I'd love to kind of keep in touch with you guys and have a whiskey chat, or at least show you the distillery. So yeah, if the world comes back, we'd love to have you over.
And Iain, remember, we're recording this, so we've all got you on video saying you know where the best casks are.
I didn't say I can open them. No, I'm joking. I know, actually, there's a really cool, sorry for a slight side tangent, but there's a cool kind of hardware shop in Aberlour, and there's a guy that works there called Charlie, who ex-distillery worker, ex-metal worker, and he makes original copper dogs. Does everyone know what a copper dog is?
Yeah. It's a device to steal some whiskey from the cask.
Indeed, yes. It's made out of a piece of piping, and it used to just so happen to fit an old halfpenny in the bottom of it. So it fits through the bung of a cask, and the reason it's called a copper dog is because it's man's best friend. It comes on a string, on a lead, and if you go for a walk with the dog, effectively you go and steal some whiskey in the olden days. But anyway, I managed to get an original one from him, so an old piece of copper with a penny from like 1963. And I thought it was the coolest thing ever, and I was walking about stealing whiskey here, left, right, and centre. But no, not for HMRC reasons. But I was like, I need to try this out. So I got them to kind of let me know which cask I could take a dip from. And I was with a group of Americans at the time, and they're like, what are we doing? I was like, we're going dogging. And they're like, what? I was like, dogging, we're going dogging.
Different meaning in the States, I believe.
Yeah. So yeah, I won't take you dogging. But sorry, that's a bad joke. But yeah, so I'm sure we could find some interesting examples. Someone said, "Oh yes, please, Luna." That was the wrong time to say that. Sorry.
We have a special button for that. It says you are banned.
I was going to say, I feel like I've lowered the tone there. Apologies. But yeah, I mean, I said, would love to show you guys around at some point. The only thing for both of us, and obviously Glencadam is slightly changing, but kind of we are production distilleries. We're in full production, so kind of we just need to know you're coming up effectively, because we have to take someone off of something to be able to show you around. If I'm around personally, I'll show you around myself. If not, I'll make sure someone looks after you. But just let us know in advance if your plans come by. We'll try our best to accommodate you.
So before I just click book, is dogging definitely off the agenda? Yeah.
Slap him, will you, Nicky?
I know. I was going to
put up at Glencadam, but it was closed at the time. Yeah. Didn't know I had to make an arrangement, but well.
No, sorry. Well, I say, Frank, we'll hopefully make up for it when the world comes back. So do let us know if you're planning a trip over. Do let me know. We'll figure something through.
Still a Dutch biker. That's me.
Cool. Perfect. No, I'll definitely. I'll keep my eyes peeled for it. But do let us know. Definitely. Again, I have a certain amount of sway in the company. So if you do, if there is anything you guys want to come and see or whatever else, do give me a shout. I'll try my best to let you in. Maybe don't knock on the front door asking about the dogging. That's probably not going to get me very far.
What's the like places to stay around by you, Iain? Is there kind of, because that's one of our biggest concerns, because obviously Nicola doesn't drive. So do you have like lodgings or hotels or anywhere around you could stay?
The town of Tomintoul, I think, has 3 hotels in it, and it's usually relatively easy to get bookings. But obviously Tomintoul isn't really a tourist hotspot. So and obviously as well, I mean, Aberlour there's some big fancy hotels there as well. So like the Craig Ellican, the Downs are pretty famous whiskey hotels. So you can go upmarket, or you can just go for something kind of that's a room with a reasonable pub underneath it. Whatever you're after. But again, if you let me know, I can point you in the right direction.
Awesome.
But there are a few different things. I tend to go. There's a great spot called the Gables, which is just opened up there in Dufton, which is like, it's a little bit further out. But they're a whiskey B&B, very well priced, but they also have a ridiculous whiskey selection. So it's quite a good way to retire at the end of the day.
And in Tomintoul, in the village Tomintoul, there is a whiskey castle, and they have a mean collection of whiskey, independent bottlers and stuff. We stayed a few days in Tomintoul, and there's nothing really there. There's, I think, 2 pubs, and that's it. But great.
I've heard there's a distillery as well, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It's actually a bit off. It's in the middle of nowhere, right? Isn't it, Iain?
So the village of Tomintoul is kind of up a hill. We are about kind of, I don't know how many miles, it's like 5 or 6 miles away from it, but we are down by the river. So the river valley of the River Anne snakes around the bottom. So we're actually, there's kind of a hillside, and we're down the bottom of that mountain. So we're a little bit off of the main town. Luna, did you try the Whiskey Castle Tomintoul ice cream?
They have ice cream. No, it was so cold. It was so cold in August that we had to bring our scarves and jackets, and 2 jackets on top of each other. So I wasn't really thinking about ice cream. But really, they have ice cream.
Yeah, they make an ice cream with Tomintoul 12-year-old Oloroso. Which
great.
It's like a Scottish rum and raisin, but it's delicious.
I have to try it next time.
They've got a brilliant selection of whiskey. But yeah, they have like a shop next door, and I remember the first time I met the new owners, and they were like, "Oh, have you tried our Tomintoul 12-year-old ice cream?" I'm like, "Need to get more of that in my system." But yeah, it's great. Good for a hangover as well. But not that you should drink so much that you have a hangover. But if you are feeling a little rough, ice cream with a bit of whiskey perks you back up again. This is shaping up to be an amazing trip, as I say for it.
It will.
But no, genuinely, I said I'd love to get you guys over if you can. And again, if there's a group of you wanting to organise something when we can receive people again, I'll try. If you can time it when I'm here, I'll take you for a fireside sessions. I say about there's a brilliant spot. So Tomintoul literally, it sits nestled in a valley in amongst the Cairngorms. So there's mountains on all sides, and we're like at the bottom of that. And there's a big river that kind of meanders past it. And it's effectively got like a little loop. It's not quite an oxbow lake, but it's kind of becoming that way. And on the edge of it, so the distillery's in the middle. And there's a kind of nice beachy embankment just to the kind of to the right of the distillery if you walk out. And yeah, I love to kind of set up a little fire pit down there, and because you've just got the sound of the river in the background, the distillery in the other side. And yeah, it's a good space to sit and have a few drams and just kind of watch the world go by. Pretty amazing sky up there as well. It's pretty good if you can get on a clear night.
Beautiful spot. Yeah.
story I could tell you of a fireside session, which again, I'm sorry if I keep jumping to tangents. But we did it for Spirit and Speyside back in 2019. And some guys had come there from Clynelish, and this guy was brandishing a big stave, and he was really chuffed with it. He's like, I got this. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. How much did you pay for that? He's like, oh, it was 35 quid at the distillery. I thought it was a steal. I was like, 35 pounds. He's like, yeah. I was like, you're going to cry when we get down to the river. And he's like, why? And literally that's what so like we got down, we're literally throwing staves on the fire. That's what we're using for heat. And he was like, all right. I was like, that's 35 quid a pop. Needless to say, he was like, can I take any of this home? So we went home with like a bundle of Tomintoul staves for free. But yeah, 35 quid for a used bit of wood. But he was like, oh yeah, like total bargain. I was like, I mean, we use them as fuel, but yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I watched his heart instantly break. He almost threw his Clynelish stave on the fire, but I kind of refrained from doing that. But it's really nice of you to bring some wood with you. But no, so yeah, if you want some staves and bits of cask, let us know. Again, the other thing is spent wood is spent wood. It makes great smoking chips for doing a brisket and a barbecue. But otherwise, we're pretty lenient with that stuff. If you have a use for it, we had one guy that took like 4 staves on a plane with him as hand luggage. He was really excited about getting them with him. So yeah, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, again, let us know. We're quite free and open with that. It's not really, we're not precious over that kind of thing.
Okay, I might try to make something out of it.
Absolutely. Well,
Frank's a bit handy when it comes to woody teas.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Well, yes, we have a guy called Vic who's kind of our engineer on site, and he makes some amazing furniture out of staves. I'm still waiting. I asked him for a sherry butt bookcase because we had a sherry butt that fell apart. He kept the wood for it, but I was like, if you can keep the sides of that and put shelves in it, that'd be so cool. Like as a life-size replica of a sherry butt bookcase. But I think he's been a bit delayed in doing other things. But yeah, again, if you want some wood, let us know. I don't think we can ship it to you free of charge, but you're welcome to take some home with you.
I might ask it, yes.
Yeah.
But I have to take it with me on the bike, so it can't be huge staves. So.
Well, I mean, it depends. If it means if you're cycling towards a car, they might think you're jousting with them. It's fine, just charging along on a bike with with some staves sticking out in front of you. It's just to keep the deer away. But again, kind of if you haven't got an impression, I mean, we're not a particularly pretentious company. We're quite open with this stuff, and I think that for a brand like ours, generally, and one of the reasons I love doing these tastings is because kind of for us, kind of. We love to chat with you guys. We appreciate the fact that you drink our whiskey. Without you, we wouldn't exist, generally. And the family's kind of respectful of that as well. We know that kind of we don't spend lots of money on advertising for in whiskey magazines or billboards or adverts on TV and all this stuff. But word gets around because of people like yourselves, and we appreciate the kind of the fact that you guys drink our drams. And I say, if I could say anything for tonight, is to keep doing so. We love it to hear that you guys are trying our products. But I say, in that basis, we're very happy to reciprocate. We don't charge for tours. We don't kind of we're not precious over things like staves and wood, and we'd love to show you around if we can. I should say, since I am on recording, I'm sure we will charge something for the tour to the visitor centre. That's the only thing I will say, but that's only so I don't get in trouble. But if you come to Tomintoul, funnily enough, all we do is we ask for, if you want to pay for it, give it to charity. We have like a charity box, so we're like, you can do a tour. If you think it's worth some money, give it to the local charity. If you don't, that's totally fine. Have a few drams. Buy a bottle at the end if you like it. That's all we kind of go for. So it's kind of the way we operate. And again, I quite like it that way. It's kind of the way I've always viewed whiskey as well. So I generally, part of the way I convey my messages because they treat me that way too. So very happy to share the love if I can.
There was one final question I had, and you touched upon it by mentioning the local charity. How important is it for Angus Dundee as a small family-run business to be embedded in the local community for both Glencadam and Tomintoul? Because for a fact I know Glencadam is even the shirt sponsor of a local football club, I believe.
Yeah, it's quite a big thing for us. I mean, we're not. It's funny because we're not corporate enough to make it big and outgoing. So we try to support locals where we can. I think a good testament from my side is the fact that both of our distilleries are fully manual. And we've been approached by multiple companies about making them automated, but we never have. And I think that's kind of an interesting element to it. So Tomintoul employs about 27 people. Glencadam, I think, is just shy of 9. It's about 19. It's just shy of 20. But we employ people to do things by hand. All of our stills are hand operated. They're hand valves. It's a pain in the arse to use, and I'm sure you could do it with a computer. But no, we generally kind of, because they're distilleries themselves, especially Tomintoul. I mean, there's not that much up there, and people that live in these kind of areas are usually either into farming, tourism, or whiskey. So we like to be able to create jobs, and it's something that kind of Tomintoul has always been a source of income for Tomintoul Village since it was built in the 1960s. So it's something we kind of go for. So yeah, there's that element that we kind of so we do employ who we can, and we do have kind of that element. We support Brecon City football team. Don't know if you guys are into football. You might know that our track record is not amazing at Brecon City, but we support them all the same. But they are literally our neighbours. And no, they're a lovely bunch. So we do kind of we do that side again. If we can figure out a trip to take you up for a Brecon City game, that would be good fun. Oh, there you go, Douglas Lee. Do you know what's funny, Andy? Is we actually bottled that because we do a lot of the bottling for Douglas Lane. But I remember seeing that label, and well, I can't tell you too much because we're on recording. But yeah, I remember seeing that label and thinking it was audacious. But yeah, we actually did the bottle.
It's a big year for us this year.
Exactly. So yeah, no, it's one of the cool things again is with ourselves is we actually we do a lot of third party bottling as well. We've kind of created a state of the art is maybe the wrong word. We're not quite Diageo levels of turnout, but we have a pretty sustainable bottling plant. So we do a lot of bottling for people like Dougie Lang, the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, lots of third party groups. So I get to see some cool things flying through the lines from time to time as well. So it's good fun. How are you doing, Nick? I think you're familiar, but I'm trying to remember where you're from. But nice to see you for joining through. You okay?
I'm really sorry, Ian, to be so late. Yeah, apologies, but great to see you.
Yeah, you too. You keeping okay?
Yeah, you well?
Yeah, doing all right. Not so bad. Having a whiskey chat, it could be worse.
It's a tough life.
We all
isn't it?
apologise for Nick.
Yeah.
No, sorry, Menno. I know you put a lot of effort into this. Apologies to be so late to it.
No, it's absolutely. That's why it's recording it, you see, so we can look back on it.
No worries, yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say well known. I would say more like infamous, Luna. But
I think they're interchangeable terms. It's fine.
Where
did Dan go? Oh, there he is. Sorry.
No, well, one thing I was going to say, and again, part of the reasons that we got to meet as well is that kind of like some of the guys that are on camera at the moment, we are doing the kind of a whiskey kind of meet and greet / whiskey hangout at the moment through our company. That again, I'm not taking away from you guys because it's very much as well as I know that Anthony and Nicky have been there too. But if any of you do fancy joining us for a dram, I recognise Jeff's obviously been with us for a few as well. But we are doing it through ourselves. So if you fancy joining up for anything, if you drop the Glencadam or Tomintoul page a message and just say you're interested. We'll add you to our list. So we are doing tastings every week or so. At the moment, it's like an introductory tasting to the whiskey, so showing you kind of a DNA element to tasting that some of you guys have done. But we are kind of trying to create that kind of outreach network as well. At the moment, while we can't see you at shows, if you do fancy coming to join us on that end, do keep in touch after tonight as well. We might be able to send you a few wee drams in the post. To kind of keep in touch going forward, and definitely we'll have to meet up for that rum tasting. I'm quite up for that, Ant and Nicky. Definitely, we can look into that too.
Excellent. So, does anybody have any final questions? Because I've run out of things I wanted to ask Ian. I think it's been great so far. We've been going on for well over 90 minutes, I think. So, thank you very much for your time.
No problem.
Anybody else want to ask some final questions or comments? Or
I'll just thank him. Very interesting. Thank you, Nick. Ian, sorry.
Oh, no problem at all. No problem at all. I say it's been a pleasure to kind of sit and chat with you guys. I say some familiar faces, and I'm honestly humbled that the guys that were joining me last night have come back on for another round. That's that's flattering. I don't know if I'd want to watch 2 nights in a row, to be honest, but I do appreciate it.
No, thank you for joining us, Ian. It's been a pleasure as usual.
No problem at all.
And thank you to Menno for arranging it all, because we literally had nothing to do with this. We literally just set up the Zoom chat. That was it. So
an absolute pleasure to have everybody on tonight. And
I'll let you wrap up, Menno, if you want to.
No, go ahead. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank Ian for giving us his time, and I'm looking forward to the future things Glencadam and Tomintoul will be bringing to us, as I think a lot of people here are. And we'll hold you to that rum tasting.
Yeah, we can make that happen. I say I'll try not to disappoint you with the new Tomintoul and Glencadams coming as well. I'm quite excited what's going to come. But thanks as well to you, Menno, as well. I love the fact that literally we had a tasting together, and Menno messaged me like, would you like to come on and chat whiskey for a little while with me? And the group, I'm like, yeah, sounds great. So yeah, very happy to do so. Again, I think that one of the great things with whiskey generally is the more you know, the more exciting and more interesting it is. Hopefully none of you guys have been bored tonight, but again, I think that there's still like a lot of smoke and mirrors in whiskey, and I think that what I try to always do is explain things as much as possible without kind of, without being too nerdy about it. I think it's always good to kind of see as much of this stuff as you can. And if you do have any questions that pop into your head, whether it's about us or just whiskey in general, you know where I am. You can give me a shout. I'd quite happily drop you an email and let you know, or if you want to kind of catch up over any bits and pieces, kind of do let me know. I'm always the end of a computer somewhere, so I'll still be the end of a computer somewhere. I can't quite get away.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers, guys. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll let you get off. Let everyone get on to their evenings.
Yeah. Thank you.
We will all talk again soon. Thank you, Iain. Thank you, Menno. Thank you to all
everybody
who joined us tonight.
Right, nice.
Have a good one, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Yes, we will.
See you later.
See you later.
See you later. Take care. Bye.
See you later.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.